Hello fellow gardeners and welcome back to the Humus Heritage. I'm thrilled you've joined me today because we're diving deep into a topic that might completely change how you view that beloved compost pile in your backyard. You spend hours diligently tending your compost, expecting a garden full of vibrant life, right? What if I told you that very compost could be secretly stunting your plant's growth and sabotaging your harvest? Today, we're going to uncover the hidden culprits in your compost pile that are silently killing your garden's potential, and I'll show you exactly how to turn things around for good. The hidden threats lurking in your compost. Here's the shocking truth that most gardeners don't want to hear. Your healthy compost might actually be hurting your plants more than helping them. After years of working with gardeners across the country, I've discovered that even the most well-intentioned composting efforts can become silent saboteurs in our gardens. The problem isn't that composting is bad, quite the opposite. The issue lies in the subtle, seemingly harmless errors that can transform your nutrient goldmine into a garden destroyer. These problems are so common that even experienced gardeners often miss them, continuing to apply what they believe is beneficial compost while wondering why their plants aren't thriving as expected. What makes these issues particularly insidious is their subtlety. Your plants might not die immediately, but they'll struggle with stunted growth, yellowing leaves, poor fruit production, or increased susceptibility to diseases. You might attribute these problems to weather, pests, or bad luck, never suspecting that your carefully crafted compost is the real culprit. The maturity trap, when immature compost steals from your plants. One of the most devastating mistakes gardeners make is using immature compost, and believe me, this is far more common than you might think. Immature compost doesn't just fail to nourish your plants, it actively robs them of the nutrients they desperately need through a process called nitrogen immobilization. When you add unfinished compost to your garden, the microorganisms still breaking down the organic matter will compete directly with your plants for available nitrogen. So, instead of feeding your tomatoes or peppers, that precious nitrogen gets locked up in the decomposition process, leaving your plants starving in what should be nutrient-rich soil. The signs of immature compost are often overlooked because we're all so eager to use our black gold. If you can still recognize most of the original ingredients in your compost, if it lacks that rich, earthy smell we all love, or if it feels warm or hot in the center, it's not ready for your garden. That heat indicates active decomposition, and using it now will create more problems than solutions. Immature compost also contains fermentation acids that can literally burn your plant's delicate root systems. I've seen gardeners lose entire seedling trays because they used compost that looked ready but was still churning with decomposition activity underneath. The chemical time bomb herbicide contamination. This next threat is particularly insidious because it can destroy your garden even when you think you're doing everything right. Herbicide contamination in compost is becoming increasingly common, and it can persist for years, turning your soil amendment into a slow-acting poison for your plants. So, the contamination typically comes from two main sources: manure from animals that grazed on treated pastures or hay, and grass clippings from lawns that have been treated with broadleaf herbicides. These chemicals, especially aminopyrrolid and clopyrrolid, can actually survive the entire composting process and remain active in your finished compost for several growing seasons. When you apply contaminated compost, your plants will show some classic signs of herbicide damage, like stunted growth, cupped or distorted leaves, and, well, poor fruit development. Tomatoes, beans, and other broadleaf crops are honestly especially susceptible. The most heartbreaking part is that this kind of damage can show up even when you're using commercially produced compost, if the source materials were contaminated. The solution really requires vigilance right from the very beginning. Always ask about herbicide use when you're sourcing manure from farms, and avoid composting grass clippings from treated lawns for at least 2 to 3 seasons after the last herbicide application. I know this might seem a bit excessive, but honestly, I've seen way too many gardens destroyed by this invisible threat. The pathogen paradise disease and weed proliferation. So here's the thing. Your compost pile might, without you even realizing it, be creating the perfect breeding ground for the very problems you're trying to avoid in your garden. Most backyard compost piles, they just never reach the temperatures necessary to kill plant pathogens and weed seeds. This means you could be spreading diseases and invasive plants throughout your garden with every shovelful of compost you apply. Now, professional composting operations, they do things a bit differently. They maintain temperatures between 140 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods, specifically to eliminate these threats. Your backyard pile, unless you're using hot composting methods and monitoring temperatures religiously, likely never reaches these sterilizing temperatures. When you add diseased plant material to your pile, like those tomato plants with blight cucumber vines with bacterial wilt or even rose bushes with black spot, those pathogens can actually survive and multiply in your compost. And, if you toss in weeds that have already gone to seed, you're basically creating a seed bank of problem plants that'll pop up all over your garden. The solution here isn't to just give up on composting, but really to be selective about what you toss into your pile. It's best to reserve your compost for healthy plant material only, and then dispose of diseased plants and seedy weeds through municipal yard waste programs where industrial-scale composting can reach the high temperatures needed for sterilization. So, yeah, that's the balance breakdown when it comes to carbon and nitrogen chaos. The salt accumulation crisis is another issue to watch out for, especially if you're composting a lot of materials that naturally contain salts. Over time, those salts can build up in your soil and cause problems for your plants. Here's a problem that, honestly, catches even experienced gardeners off guard: excessive soluble salt buildup from well-meaning compost applications. This is particularly common when you're using manure-based composts or applying compost too heavily, especially in container gardening and greenhouse growing where, natural rainfall just can't leach out the excess salts. Salt toxicity from compost usually shows up as wilting plants even when soil moisture is totally adequate, yellowing leaf edges and tips, and, poor root development. The plants essentially become dehydrated because the high salt concentration in the soil makes it difficult for roots to absorb water effectively. The key here is understanding that compost should be a soil amendment, not a primary growing medium. Even the best compost should be mixed into your existing soil, rather than used as a standalone planting medium. Apply compost at agronomic rates, meaning you add only as much nitrogen as your plants can actually utilize during the growing season. The oxygen starvation problem is something that a lot of folks run into, especially if their compost pile gets waterlogged. Anaerobic conditions in compost create some of the most damaging compounds for plant health, yet this problem is incredibly common in backyard piles. When your compost becomes waterlogged and compacted, it shifts from beneficial aerobic decomposition to harmful anaerobic fermentation. Compost comeback, transforming your pile into a growth engine. Let's talk about bringing your compost back to life and making it work for you. Now that we've identified these hidden threats, let's talk about turning your compost pile into the powerhouse it was meant to be. The transformation, honestly, starts with patience and proper maturity testing. Finished compost should be dark, crumbly, and smell like rich forest soil. It should no longer generate heat and should be unrecognizable from its original ingredients. Implement a simple testing routine for your compost. The jar test is, honestly, incredibly effective. Fill a jar with your compost and water, let it settle, then check for layering. Finished compost creates a relatively uniform mixture, while immature compost will separate into distinct layers. Source your compost materials carefully, building relationships with local farms and neighbors who can verify their land management practices. Create a rotation system where you maintain multiple piles at different stages of decomposition, ensuring you always have mature compost available without rushing the process. If you're serious about hot composting, consider investing in a compost thermometer and, make sure to maintain detailed records of temperatures and your turning schedules. This level of attention might seem a bit excessive, but honestly, it's the difference between compost that transforms your garden and compost that, sabotages it. Remember, great compost is like fine wine. It can't be rushed, and the patience you invest in creating it will pay dividends in your garden's health and productivity for years to come. Your next steps to compost success. The journey to perfect compost starts with an honest assessment of your current pile and practices. Take a close look at what you've been adding, how you've been managing moisture and aeration, and most importantly, how your plants have been responding to your compost applications. If you found value in today's deep dive into compost troubleshooting, please subscribe to the Humus Heritage for more in-depth gardening insights that go beyond surface-level advice. Share this guide with fellow gardeners who might be struggling with mysterious plant problems. They might discover their compost has been the hidden culprit all along. Together, we can build a community of gardeners who understand that great gardens start with great soil, and great soil starts with properly managed compost.